Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going deep on something, well, kind of basic.
Basic.
Yeah, money. That thing we use every single day but never really, stop and think about.
I see where you're going with this.
Right, so you've been digging into a ton of research, history, economics, even some philosophy,
It's only a real deep dive.
and it all boils down to one question that honestly kind of blew my mind.
Hit me with it.
Could the actual type of money we use actually change how we act as individuals, as a whole society?
Oh, you're saying like money has morals and it rubs off on us.
Exactly.
Really?
Wild, right?
It really makes you think twice about pulling out your credit card, huh?
No kidding. So I guess before we go any further, we should probably answer the most basic question. What is money?
Well, I mean, it's what we use to buy stuff, right?
Yeah, sure, but is that all it is?
At its core, money has three main roles. It's what we exchange so we don't have to barter chickens for haircuts.
Right, makes sense.
It's a store of value so we can save for the future. And it's a unit of account. It's how we compare the value of things, like a common language for value.
So it's not just about the physical cash, it's like this whole system of trust, an agreement.
Exactly.
And that system has obviously changed a lot over time.
Oh, absolutely. We started with bartering, then we had things like gold, and now we're in the age of fiat currency.
See, now that's a term I hear all the time, but I'm not sure I totally get it. What makes fiat different?
Think of it this way. Fiat currency is basically a promise from the government.
A promise, okay.
It's not like gold, which is backed by, well, gold. Fiat's value is based on the government saying, trust us. This piece of paper is worth something.
So it's all about trust. But couldn't that be, I don't know, manipulated pretty easily?
That's a big criticism of fiat, yeah.
Yeah.
Governments can basically print as much as they want. And what does that lead to? Inflation.
Right. Like when prices just keep going up and your money doesn't go as far as it used to.
Yeah.
So how does this whole hardness of money thing play into all this?
Hardness is all about how easy it is to, well, create more of a particular type of money.
Okay, so more, easier, less hard.
You got it. Gold, for example, is considered hard money. It's tough to mine. The supply grows slowly. Fiat is the opposite, super soft. Governments can just, poof, create more.
So the harder the money, the harder it is to inflate.
You got it. You know, there are some really fascinating examples of different types of money from history. On the island of Yap, they used huge limestone discs. Can you imagine trying to counterfeit that?
That's incredible. But I guess it also shows how kind of random money can be. Like what we agree it is, right?
That's the heart of it. But that agreement, especially with fiat, can have huge consequences. And not just rising prices. It can change how we behave, how we make decisions.
Wait, really?
And think about it. If you know your money's going to be worth less tomorrow, are you more likely to spend it today?
Yeah, probably. I know I do that sometimes. Impulse buys and all. It's only a few bucks.
That's exactly what fiat encourages. Short-term thinking. Saving becomes less effective. It's almost like a hidden tax on being patient.
So fiat's making us less patient. That's a wild thought.
It's one of the less obvious but huge impacts of our money system. And it goes even deeper than that. Some experts even say fiat can make us less ethical.
Hold up, I gotta hear more about this. How can money make us less ethical?
Let me tell you a story. One of our sources talked about a winemaker struggling with inflation. This guy's got a choice. Lower the quality of his wine, raise his prices, or go out of business.
Oof, that's a rough spot to be in.
And it's a dilemma so many businesses face.
Yeah, I get it. It's like a moral trap.
Yeah.
Compromise your values or risk your livelihood.
Exactly.
Mm.
Fiat creates these situations because it's so easy to, well, manipulate. There's always this temptation to cut corners or game the system.
And I bet this thinking, it doesn't just stop with individuals, right?
Definitely not. It scales up to the whole society. If our money's always losing value, we all start focusing on quick wins, even if it means sacrificing something bigger in the long run.
It's like we're all living on borrowed time.
Yeah, it's pretty heavy stuff. But it really opens your eyes to how much impact our money system has, right?
Totally. I've never thought about it this way before.
That's what these deep dives are all about, peeling back the layers and seeing the connections. But there's one more piece to this puzzle I want to talk about. The concept of Schrodinger's debt.
Uh-oh, that sounds intimidating.
It's actually a pretty simple idea. It's all about the hidden cost of all that government spending. Think of it like a leaky faucet, right? The government keeps running it, telling you, it's fine, it's just a few drips.
But eventually...
Your house floods. That flood, that's inflation. And it was caused by those little drips of debt-fueled spending.
So it's like this hidden debt until it suddenly shows up as inflation.
Exactly. It's in this weird state like it exists and doesn't exist at the same time. Until, bam, prices go up. And get this, one of our sources pointed out that the global fiat supply has been increasing by an average of 14% every year for the past 60 years.
Wow. That is a lot of hidden debt.
It is.
So if fiat's got all these problems, is there a different way?
Well, some people think the answer might be this revolutionary technology, Bitcoin.
Okay, Bitcoin. Everyone's talking about it, but I gotta be honest, I'm still kind of fuzzy on what it actually is.
People call it a decentralized digital currency. Decentralized, meaning no one controls it, not like our current system. And it has a fixed supply. No one can just print more.
So like digital gold, but even more scarce.
Good analogy.
Yeah.
And another big difference from fiat, its value comes from something tangible, the real energy it takes to, mine it.
Wait, like actual electricity and computer power.
Exactly. Bitcoin's value isn't based on some promise from the government. It's based on the resources that go into creating it. Total opposite of Schrodinger's debt, where value just appears out of thin air.
That's pretty mind-blowing. But what about all the talk about Bitcoin being like super volatile? How can something be a store of value if its price is always jumping up and down?
Yeah, a lot of people worry about that. Our sources say that volatility tends to decrease as the market matures. It's still early days, but it's showing signs of becoming more stable.
So like a roller coaster that's slowly smoothing out its ride.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And then there's the energy use. Bitcoin mining uses a lot of power, but there's also arguments that it could help renewable energy grow and be located strategically to lessen environmental impact. It's complicated.
A lot to unpack there. But I'm starting to see why people are so excited about Bitcoin. It's such a huge shift in how we think about money.
It challenges everything we thought we knew, that's for sure. And even if Bitcoin itself doesn't become the money of the future, it started a conversation that forces us to look at money in a whole new way.
And that's what I love about these deep dives. We're not just learning facts, we're exploring these big ideas that can change how we see the world. And this whole conversation, it's making me think about the even bigger picture, the philosophical side of money. Like, is it just a tool or is it something?
Great question. And that's something we're going to dig into in the next part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, everyone. Things are about to get even more interesting. Welcome back, everyone. So we've been talking about, well, what money even is, how it's changed over time, and some of those issues with our current system, fiat.
It's kind of mind-blowing to realize how much our money system can affect us. I mean, potentially making us less patient, maybe even a little less honest. Crazy.
No kidding. I've definitely had some aha moments already, that's for sure.
That's what it's all about, those moments when you see things in a new light. And speaking of perspective, I think looking at the history of money can be really helpful here, especially what went down in the 20th century.
The 1900s. Okay, yeah, that was a pretty intense time period, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You had the rise and fall of the gold standard, the birth of fiat as we know it today, not to mention 2 world wars.
Yeah, wars. They're not exactly cheap, are they? I can't even imagine what those did to monetary systems.
You're telling me. Wars are insanely expensive. And one of the sources we dug into actually argues that governments basically use fiat currency to fund their war efforts.
Whoa, really? So like printing money to pay for a war, isn't that just pushing the real cost onto like future generations?
That's one way to look at it. There's this quote from the source that really stuck with me. I'm just going to read it here. You can't have permanent war without fiat. And I also think there's a case to be made that you can't really have fiat without war. Schilling, right.
Makes you think about the relationship between money and power. It's like, which came first, the fiat or the war?
It's a chicken or the egg kind of thing, Yeah. But that quote really highlights how things can escalate. Like, a war gives you a reason to print more money, but then having all that easy money around could make going to war more tempting.
It's a vicious cycle, for sure.
Definitely. And World War I is a prime example. It was mostly financed through debt and inflation, which set the stage for all the economic chaos that came after.
It's easy to think about history as just like dates and names in a textbook, but when you connect it to something like money, it suddenly becomes a lot more real. Like, these decisions had real consequences for people's lives.
For sure. And sometimes those consequences don't show up right away. Remember that concept we talked about earlier, Schrodinger's debt? The hidden cost of government spending?
Leaky faucet analogy, right?
Exactly. It's like the government keeps running that faucet, insisting it's fine, it's just a few drips, but then your house floods. That flood, that's inflation. And it was all caused by those little seemingly harmless drips of debt-fueled spending.
It's a delayed reaction, but the impact is huge.
Totally. It's debt that's just hanging over us until it suddenly pops up as higher prices for, well, everything. And what's crazy is most people don't even see where it's coming from.
That's kind of scary when you think about it. Like, this hidden debt is just silently eroding our savings.
It is. And this isn't just some historical thing,
Yeah.
Look at what's happening right now in countries battling hyperinflation. Textbook example of what can happen when governments print too much money.
It's a stark reminder that the problems of fiat currency aren't just theoretical. Like, people are losing their life savings because the money they worked so hard for is suddenly worthless.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
a human tragedy.
Hmm.
That's why it's so important to understand how these systems work. To question those narratives we're fed. One of our sources argues that the move to fiat, it was presented as a temporary thing during wartime, had morphed into this permanent feature of our financial system.
You know what they say? There's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program.
Truth. And that move from gold to fiat, it changed everything. How we think about saving, investing, even our whole relationship with the future.
Whoa, okay, how so?
Well, one expert argued that fiat currency has led to a decline in something called time preference.
Okay, time preference. Remind me what that is again.
Basically, it's how much we value something right now versus getting it later. Like, would you rather have $100 today or $110 a year from now? Your answer depends on your time preference.
Right. Okay, so how does fiat mess with that?
Because fiat's always losing value, it kind of pushes us to want things and now W. It's all about instant gratification. Saving for the future becomes less appealing because, well, your money won't be worth as much later.
Yeah, it makes sense. If I know my money's going to be worth less next year, I might as well just buy that new gadget today. But is that a good thing? It sounds like it makes us all more impulsive and short-sighted.
It's a big concern for sure. And that short-term thinking, it can spill over into all areas of life. It impacts everything from how we make things to how willing we are to tackle big long-term problems like climate change.
It's like we're so busy putting out fires that we don't have time to think about preventing them in the first place.
Exactly. And that brings us back to this idea of Bitcoin as an alternative.
Okay, let's talk more about Bitcoin. You mentioned that it has a fixed supply, right? So no one can just decide to print more. How does that actually work?
It's all coded in. Bitcoin's total supply is capped at 21 million coins. There's a set schedule, totally transparent and predictable for how those coins get created through something called mining.
So no central bank or government can just like whip up more Bitcoin.
That's the beauty of it. And that built-in scarcity is a major difference between Bitcoin and fiat. A lot of people compare it to digital gold for this very reason.
But doesn't that also mean Bitcoin could end up being too deflationary? Like, if demand keeps rising and the supply is stuck, won't prices just go up and up?
That's a good point. Some economists argue that a little bit of deflation can actually be a good thing. It encourages saving and investment. But obviously, if deflation gets out of control, it can stifle economic growth. It's about finding that sweet spot.
So it's not like this perfect utopia.
Of course not. It's got its own set of challenges, for sure. But I think what's important is the conversation itself. We're looking at the history of money, acknowledging what's not working with our current system. And from that, we can start to imagine and build something better.
You know, one thing that really intrigues me is this idea that Bitcoin could actually encourage us to think more long term. Like, we've been talking about how fiat pushes us towards instant gratification, but how could Bitcoin change that?
It goes back to those core principles: scarcity, predictability. Bitcoin's fixed supply encourages people to hold on to their wealth over time. Imagine planting a tree knowing it'll bear fruit years down the line. It's kind of like that.
I like that analogy. And because it's decentralized, no one can manipulate it or take it away.
That's the idea. It's like a savings account that's immune to the whims of governments or central banks.
What about all the, the negative stuff you hear about Bitcoin? Like, isn't it mostly used by criminals?
Honestly, that's a common misconception. Sure, Bitcoin's been used for illegal stuff, but cash is still the king when it comes to criminal activity. And as regulations improve, as the tech gets better, it's actually getting much harder to use Bitcoin for those purposes.
So it's more about perception than reality.
I think so, yeah. But look, let's be real. Bitcoin isn't a magical solution. It's got its own issues:
Yeah.
volatility, scalability, and figuring out the whole regulatory landscape.
Right, it's not perfect. But what gets me excited is the potential for innovation. Like, Bitcoin is just the beginning. There are so many other cryptocurrencies, blockchain technologies popping up, things that could completely transform the way we think about money and
A
finance.
wild, wild west out there, that's for sure. And I think it's important to approach it all with a healthy dose of curiosity and skepticism, you know?
I'm with you there. We need to be critical thinkers and ask tough questions. But at the same time, we can't be afraid to explore new possibilities.
Exactly. One of those possibilities is a world where money is truly incorruptible, transparent, accessible to everyone. Can you imagine?
Okay, that's a vision worth getting behind for sure. But even if Bitcoin itself doesn't become the money of the future, it's already made us question so many assumptions about money. And it's made us ask, what role does it really play in society?
It's shaken things up, that's for sure. And those questions, they lead us to an even deeper level, the philosophy, the ethics of money.
Okay, now we're getting to the really good stuff. We've talked about how money affects our actions, but what about our values, our morals? How does it all connect?
One of the sources we looked at argues that when you have a corrupt monetary system, it creates this ripple effect through the entire society. It erodes trust, and it encourages people to act in ways that aren't, well, ethical. It's like playing a game where the rules practically force you to cheat.
So it's not just about economics, it's about aligning our money with our values.
Exactly. If the game encourages people to cooperate, to think long term, they're more likely to do those things. And there's this argument that Bitcoin, with its incorruptible design and focus on individual sovereignty, could actually lead to a more virtuous society.
Hold on, are you saying Bitcoin could make us more ethical? That's a pretty big claim.
It is, I know. But the idea is that a sound money system can create the right environment for trust, for accountability, for ethical behavior. If the system itself is fair and transparent, it encourages people to act with integrity, which in turn strengthens the whole system.
Like a positive feedback loop. But isn't that a bit idealistic? Are we really going to solve all of humanity's problems just by switching to a new type of money?
Of course not. We're human, we're complicated, challenges are always going to exist. But I think it's important to approach all this with a sense of optimism, to be open to these possibilities.
You know, one thing that really struck me in all our research was this idea that Bitcoin is like an evolutionary imperative for humanity. Like it's not just about tech, it's about moving towards a more, I don't know, loving, cooperative world.
That's a powerful vision. And whether you buy into that or not, Bitcoin has undoubtedly made us confront these fundamental questions about who we are, how we want to live, what kind of future we want to create.
It's a lot to take in, but it's also exciting, you know, thinking about all this potential for positive change. So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Key takeaways. I think one of the biggest is that money is not this neutral tool we often think it is. It has power. Power to shape how we act, what we value, and even how we see reality.
And the choices we make about money, about our financial systems, they have huge implications for the future, not just for us, but for civilization itself.
No doubt about it. And as we move further into this century, those choices are going to become even more critical.
We'll be right back after a quick break to finish up this deep dive. We've got some final thought-provoking ideas to leave you with, so stick around. Welcome back, everyone. We've covered a ton in this deep dive, from the history of money to the potential of Bitcoin. We even went kind of philosophical, right? Thinking about the implications of it all.
Definitely been quite a journey. We went way back, explored how money even came about, talked about those inherent flaws in fiat, and then bam, those revolutionary ideas behind Bitcoin.
And I think what really got me was that ethical angle. Like how the type of money we use could actually affect us on a moral level.
It's a powerful idea, isn't it? It's not just about numbers and economics. Money's woven into our values, the kind of society we create.
So as we wrap things up here, let's break it down for our listeners. Like, what are those big aha moments, the stuff that makes you see things differently?
Okay, key takeaways. Let's do it. First one, and this might seem obvious, but it's worth repeating, money. Way more than just a tool for buying things.
Right. It's not just about those transactions. It's like this technology, a social technology, that affects everything, our incentives, how we behave, even what we believe about trust and power and value.
Exactly. Takeaway number 2, the system we have now, fiat currency. It's got some serious issues.
Yeah, big time. Inflation eating away at our savings, all that debt, and a system that seems to reward thinking short term, even encouraging risky behavior. It's a lot.
And all of that stems from a system where, well, governments can just create money whenever they want. Which brings us to takeaway number 3, Bitcoin. It's a totally different beast.
It's like flipping the script, honestly. Decentralized, no one's in total control. Fixed supply, no endless printing.
Yeah.
And its value is tied to real-world energy, not just, a promise.
That's an experiment, a bold one. And it highlights this crucial point, the future of money. It's totally intertwined with the future of civilization itself.
Heavy stuff. The choices we make about money, our systems, they're going to have ripple effects on everything. On our societies, our economies, and even our own lives. It's almost like choosing a path for humanity.
You got it. And that brings us to a final thought, a question for our listeners to ponder. What if money was truly incorruptible, resistant to manipulation, accessible to everyone? What would that world look like?
Would it be this utopia, peace, prosperity, or would it create new problems we can't even imagine yet? I don't think there's an easy answer, but asking the question is the first step.
It's a call to action, to join this conversation about money and what it means for all of us.
Because the future, it's not set in stone. It's created by the choices we make, the systems we build, the values we choose.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, our message is simple. Keep learning, keep questioning, keep exploring.
Because when you understand money, you can make better choices. Not just for yourself, but for a future that's more just and more sustainable for everyone.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. We hope it made you think, challenged some assumptions, maybe even blew your mind a little bit.
Until next time, keep diving deep.